Next, I'd like to introduce you to Kerri, Moseley-Hobbs, and MaryLyle. Their presentation will be titled "The Reality of the Unfinished Business of Enslavement and Testing the Feasibility of Reconciliation." Dr. Kerri Moseley-Hobbs is Executive Director of the More Than a Fraction Foundation. Dr. Moseley-Hobbs continues an almost 20-year career in post-secondary education, including administration and research program development, policy regulation, experiential learning, and historical research. She leads the foundation's work on projects regarding the voices of Africans in America and Africans of the 17th and 18th centuries. She is a fifth-generation descendant of John Fraction, the subject of her first creative nonfiction book, More Than a Fraction, based on a true story. Please welcome her, give her a round of applause. And her co-presenter, MaryLyle, who will be joining us virtually, works in information technology as a project manager, instructional designer, and data analyst. She has a background in education, behavioral therapy, and mind-body integrative practices. A descendant of James Patton Preston, she is currently collaborating with close and extended family in the More Than a Fraction Foundation to explore descendancy and cultural reconciliation. Please welcome her to the symposium. And joining us virtually is Urban L. Jordan Jr. His presentation will be Campus of the Damned, Slave Families at the University of Virginia, 1818 through 1865. Professor Jordan Jr. is an associate professor and research archivist at the University of Virginia's Albert and Shirley Small Special Collections Library since 1979. He specializes in Civil War, African American history, and Virginia history, and is the author of 3 books, including Black Confederates and Afro-Yankees in Civil War Virginia, and that was published through University Press of Virginia in 1995. Professor Jordan has published nearly 70 articles. That deserves a round of applause on its own. Book chapters and reviews for a variety of publications, including the Encyclopedia of Virginia, and is a Wikipedia entry. A member of the university's Memorial of Enslaved Laborers Names Committee, and formerly of the President's Commission on Slavery and the university. Professor Jordan's research on the African American experience has appeared in 2 University of Virginia Press monographs: The Key to the Door, Experiences of Early African American Students at the University of Virginia, and The Founding of Thomas Jefferson's University. Please welcome him to the symposium. Last but definitely not least, Shelley Viola Murphy. Her presentation will be Beyond the Records, Conversations with Descendants of Slave Owners and Genealogy. An avid genealogist for over 30 years, Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy, AKA Family Tree Girl. She conducts genealogy workshops at local, state, and national conferences. Murphy serves on the board of the Library of Virginia and the Albemarle, Charlottesville, and Fluvanna Historical Societies. She's a coordinator and instructor at the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute, and develops staff and public genealogy educational programs for the Center for Family History at the International African American Museum. She serves as genealogist general for the Society of the First African Families of English America and trustee for the International Society for British Genealogy and Family History. Currently working for the University of Virginia for the Descendant Project as a researcher seeking descendants, the enslaved laborers who helped build the university. Host of Freedmen's Bureau Fridays, an adjunct professor at Averett University since 2009. Please welcome her to the Lemon Project Symposium. And so we'll be joined by Dr. Janae Willis, PhD, with her presentation.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Janae Willis, pronouns she, her, hers. I am originally from Georgia, but not right now. I serve as a current postdoctoral fellow at Texas Christian University. And today's my presentation is entitled Texas Christian University's 150th anniversary, or the sesquicentennial. I had to practice that word a lot because it's a tongue twister. Commitment, compassion, and communal healing. So to provide a brief overview of what I'll address in today's presentation, I'll begin by sharing the importance of what it means to do race and reconciliation work within the sesquicentennial anniversary. Then I'll address year 4's foci for the RI. Then I'll move into the guiding research questions of the research. I'll define pandemic as is particular to our research. And then I'll move into the methodology, followed by the key findings, and connected to the key findings, address the foci, and then share some deliverables of that as well. And then I'll close out with a quote by an individual in terms of the important work of the Oral History Project. And of course, my references. So what does it mean to do race and reconciliation work within the sesquicentennial? In coming to this work, I always acknowledge my positionality as a researcher. And as a researcher, I hold a lot of power. And in doing this work, it's important to acknowledge that I hold a lot of shared power in terms of how I show up in this work. I'm not the sole power holder in space, especially in terms of that communal healing and how we move forward in terms of acknowledging the history of the university, in terms of the university's history with slavery, racism, and the Confederacy, honoring that history. And then let's move into the present. How are we honoring the present in terms of that reconciliation? And then really thinking about how we're forging a brighter future so that we're not making the same mistakes. So within year 4, it's critical to name that the initiative itself was established as a charge by the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the university. And it takes on a tri-dimensional approach in its establishment. Number one, considering the peak of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, then understanding the death of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, and then a civil lawsuit at TCU in 2020, really a case that was against TCU on the basis of 5 Black women on the account of racism and discrimination. Now, within year 4, the particular foci of this year's research is 1998 to 2020, which is why I thought it was important to capture the coronavirus pandemic. Because what past reports have done at the university, and with research at large in the universities of the University Studying Slavery Consortium, I've seen a lot of work about what racism does at the university, but not really how the pandemics, ongoing pandemics, inclusive of the coronavirus, elitism, classism, anti-Black racism, have impacted this work. So the research questions guiding the work. Number 1, how did and how does the coronavirus pandemic impact race and reconciliation work across universities? specifically considering TCU's campus? And number two, in what ways have existing pandemics, such as anti-Black racism, impacted race and reconciliation work in TCU's community?
I'm just trying to get you in the camera so
Oh, I'm sorry.
you keep moving out of the frame.
Sorry about it. Defining pandemic for the purpose of our research: an infectious disease impacting numerous populations, locally, domestically, as well as globally, for an extended or ongoing period of time. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic changed a lot of things. And in addition to that, there are ongoing pandemics that were also impacting how we navigate society, be it anti-Black racism, classism, elitism, and several other pandemics. So the methodology. My research team comprises myself and 2 graduate research assistants. And so we approach this from the frame of data triangulation, considering primary sources, going into the library itself and thinking about archival data. Then thinking about how we engage in secondary resources. These are accessible online through the library, be it news articles, journal articles, or the TCU magazine itself. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Oral History Project, really cultivating as well as sustaining a space for those who are affiliates of TCU to really share their stories, the whole story through their own lens, specifically for those from historically racial marginalized backgrounds. So the key findings for year 4, as it addresses 1998 to 2020, in which there are 5. There's leadership, academics, athletics, infrastructure, and student involvement. The common thread between each of these is the student involvement. Past reports have done a really good job of saying this has impact, race and reconciliation work has impacted faculty, staff in this way, as well as alumni, and students specifically is minimally addressed. So I found it critical to really understand how are students impacting the work? How are students being the guiders of what's happening at the university? So with that, the students' voices and narratives are the foci, specifically Black students. In 1971, Black students made a list of student demands. And then soon following, in 2016, student demands again made by Black students. And then in 2020, when the charge was given by the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, there was recommendations tied to the Race and Reconciliation Initiative. And so within these threads, I'll address them. So let's think about the 1971 student demands. Some of it's an exhaustive list, but for the sake of time, I'm only including a few. So the student demands for 1971 are inclusive of the revision of policy changes in dress codes and athletics be made non-discriminatory for Black people, hiring of a Black minister, hiring of a Black psychologist, hiring more Black professors. And the common thread between these 3 is that representation truly matters. And then thinking about the core curriculum at TCU, with the demand being more Black studies focused classes. Now that I've addressed the 1971 student demands, let's think about the 2016 student demands made by Black students. So the first being, students demanded that TCU revise the code of conduct to reflect a zero tolerance policy for racially insensitive and hate speech. They too demanded that TCU increase faculty of color by at least 10%. And then they also demanded that accurate annual reports reflect TCU's progress in terms of increasing diversity at the university. And then the last 2 demands really get at the creation of a multicultural center for students as well as by students. And then the last being students involved in the implementation, along with the faculty and staff who are supporting these demands, do not suffer any negative repercussions. And so let's think about, now that I've shared with you the 1971 student demands, the 2016 student demands, let's think about the 2020 recommendations from the RI itself. Sorry, can you hear my water? So in the recommendations, it's recommended that TCU develop and implement a comprehensive strategic plan to promote equity and inclusion. Recommending also that providing more robust contextual information near the founder statues of the Clark brothers at the institution. Also recommending the development of an online digital repository that be held in the library itself. Following that, recommending that consistently recognizing the contributions of Black, Indigenous, and numerous alumni of color. And then really thinking about how are we acknowledging these individuals annually at our Reconciliation Day. And to tie to this one, we just honored the first Black cheerleader in the month of February, which we all know is Black History. And then another recommendation from the RI is an official increased list of diverse vendors. So who is TCU in partnership with and in community with in terms of bringing and building community across the university, but within the Fort Worth community itself. And then recommending the continuation of the RI beyond the year 2020, which was its initial establishment. So some deliverables from the 1971 student demands, the 2016 student demands, and then the 2020 recommendation. TCU hired a Black counselor, Roy Madden, in 1972. TCU attempted to establish a Black Studies minor, which lasted all but a decade. TCU established the Comparative Race and Ethnic Studies program and the African American Africana Studies program. And then TCU established the Intercultural Center in 2021, again, by students, for students. And then TCU hosts an annual Reconciliation Day, and the initiative has gone beyond the initial year of its establishment for 5 years, currently in this year 4, focused on 98 to 2020. So, as I shared before, one of our approach to the methodology is the oral history project. And as has been a common theme throughout the conference as well, from people talking about desegregation and what it meant to like go from segregation to integration. Thinking about, I commonly heard them say it made us stronger, and we don't have any regrets. And so I want to share a quote with you that I often ask at the end of each oral history project interview. I ask the question, what does reconciliation mean to you? Dr. Matthews shared, a Black woman, being able to tell the story in its wholeness, where wrong was being done, being corrected, and where the things that were done correctly and the things that advanced us, we build upon. Celebrate what we did get right and build on that. That's the part that most do not focus on, is acknowledging what was done right, not focusing solely on the errors. Part of righting the wrong is making sure it doesn't happen again. To move forward, achieving a collective freedom, a collective healing. Talk about how we got over despite it all. When you reconcile, there are no regrets. Everything I have experienced made me who I am today. Creating a space to share how we got over is how we reconcile. And I'll share a short clip of the song itself. Okay.
When we first arrived at St. Jude, it was just Claire and I. I got over. I didn't think it over. You know my soul back in wonder. I didn't make it over. I made it over.
And so so in doing this work in partnership and again, in community with individuals who are affiliates of TCU, it's important to acknowledge where the harm was done, and equally important, how do we move forward? How do we get over and continue to move forward? Thank you.
Let's give her another round of applause. And next, we will have Dr. Kerri Moseley-Hobbs and MaryLyle.
MaryLyle, you can hear me, you can bring us up.
I'm available. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can. We can.
Okay. I gotta grant security apparently. 1 second. There we go. Apparently I have to quit and reopen, guys. I'm so sorry. It's not gonna let me share unless I do that.
It's okay, I brought you up so they can see you.
What'd you say?
I brought you up so they can see you over the bench.
Okay. Let me quit and reopen real quick.
Okay. So while MaryLyle does that, I'm gonna give a little preface. MaryLyle is the descendant of the family who enslaved my family. We've gotten to the point in our work, if you recall, I had mentioned, what she had mentioned in the introduction, that we're working on a case study called the Feasibility of Reconciliation. And that gets to our two families trying to address, if we pick up from where slavery left off, what does that process look like? How do you define reconciliation? What does it even mean? What is it? What does it look like? And is it even possible in the first place? The initial work of our foundation was finding all of the descendants of my family, of the people who were enslaved at Smithfield, which you know today as Virginia Tech University. The primary focus of our work was finding what we call lost cousins. We were very, very focused on ourselves and our history. It just so happened at the same time that some of the Prestons of the new generation, I'll call them elder millennials and down, started doing the same type of work, trying to figure out their history, their background. And they arrived at Smithfield a few years later. And Smithfield had noticed and had let them know, as well as Virginia Tech, that our family existed and we was doing some work, and they may want to call and talk to us about what we were doing. In those initial conversations, we realized that both of our two families was kind of exploring, how do you deal with a history of slavery in your families? We had all looked at some previous work done by others, and we all noticed something that we couldn't necessarily agree with or relate to, and that was becoming friends, that was becoming cousins, and that was starting over and building a new relationship. And one thing that we could agree on was that we had an unfinished business of slavery before we can even get to a conversation about what we look like in modern times in terms of our relationship with each other and our interaction with each other. So we had agreed, groups of us, to do this case study on the feasibility of reconciliation, to figure out what that looks like and what that process is in the most authentic way possible. And we've spent, it's a little over 3 years in this process. And during this process, we're really trying to document every inch of it from both sides in both perspectives. And we've gotten to the point in our work, when we first started out, I used to come out most often. Some of you have probably seen me before, talking about the work that we were doing in the family, talking about the case study on the feasibility of reconciliation, and we've gotten to the point now where it is appropriate and needed that a member of the Preston family join in these kind of presentations and conversations, because I'm not the only descendant line that has to do this work. I also thought that that was important because I was seeing a mixture of demographics, most like in this room today, where it's not just descendants of people who were enslaved, but you also have people of European descent that even if you might be, you know, second or third generation and your ancestors may not have been here for American slavery, because of your appearance, you end up in that demographic and having that experience in this work and in the rooms with this type of work. So next slide. So one of the things that MaryLyle and I are going to talk about today is really reflecting on perspectives. We're going to talk about how when we go about the two different ways or two different things that we're doing, how we actually come about it from two different directions. One of the main things that we learned during this process was that we even understood words differently. One thing about the Prestons that we learned was that for our family, even if we didn't know the details of our story of enslavement until we started doing the research, there was no point in our lives, even when we find the lost cousins, where we didn't know that we were descendants of enslaved people, where we didn't know that we probably came from Virginia or probably somewhere down south, where we didn't know we were laboring, where we didn't know that some of us were probably descendants coming out of rape, where we didn't know that we had generational traumas because of history and slavery. There's not a point where any of us had to learn that. We all just remember knowing that information. What we learned from working with the Preston descendants, MaryLyle, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I've been here. I got back on pretty quick.
Okay, all right. Because I was waiting for you to come back on. I'll stop for a minute and let you chime in.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I
appreciate it. One of the first things we learned from the Preston descendants is it's not just MaryLyle and her immediate family, but she was also finding lost Preston cousins, was that they generally had a like family rule in the Preston family, which is they didn't talk about the slavery. So even starting a conversation, we had to kind of go through their history with them so that they can learn the details, which taught us that if they would have came in the conversation and immediately wanted to reconcile and apologize, they didn't even know what they were reconciling and apologizing for. They would have done it because it was the right thing to do without an understanding of what that thing is and what that right thing is and what the do is and the right thing to do. So do you have control of the slides, MaryLyle?
I do. Jump forward.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the first questions we had is, what is reconciliation? We still cannot define this 3.5 years later. And so I come to a lot of these conferences and symposiums, and we have a lot of conversations about reconciliation. We're all using the term. It becomes very, very different when you're in conversation with the actual descendants of the people who enslaved your family. When it becomes a very real conversation, it's a very hard thing to define and to break down. And so, and I don't know if you want to jump in with that one, MaryLyle, about what is reconciliation.
Yeah,
You first started
I mean,
talking about it.
when you come at this from like a scientific background, or you're looking at like what the goals and the purposes of the process are, people want to know the answer. They want to know, what are you aiming for? What's your goal in mind? And if reconciliation is your goal, then what is it? And one of the things that we realized is that we have to define who we are now before we can possibly define what the future looks like. And it's still an investigation of who we are, where we are, and how you have a conversation coming from these two different perspectives. I think that's been, and the two different processes, as Kira pointed out, if you're coming from a position where you have been discussing this for a long time and you're very solid in your knowledge of it, as you know, the descendant of enslaved people, if you're the descendant of the enslaver and you figure that out while sitting at a family reunion and looking out and going, wait, this was a plantation. Wait, what? No. Someone talk to me now. You know, when you discover it in that way, first of all, it makes you feel stupid because like it should be obvious, but it's something that's like purposely avoided and brushed away. And so defining who you are now becomes incredibly important before you can define where you're going with this conversation and the process.
And then how hard that process is. So MaryLyle isn't here today. She had planned to be here. Every time we try to do something very specific, every time MaryLyle tries to take an action item, I don't know if y'all superstitious, we always talk about the ancestors when it comes to Black people. When we season our food, we just season it till the ancestors say stop. So if you believe in the ancestry, there's an ancestry on the other side. Every time we try to take an action, something happens to her. We had an event on the campus of Virginia Tech in March 2022. On the day of that event, where we were addressing the history of slavery on Virginia Tech, we were not necessarily diminishing the name of the Prestons, but the goal was to bring in the name of the Fractions and Ignorance family. It wasn't the presence of the Prestons that was wrong, it was the absence of everyone else. That was the language that we were using. That day in Blacksburg, every possible weather that could happen in a 4-hour time span when we were gathered at this location on Virginia Tech's campus called the Mary Tree. It was the tree, was the location of which the enslaved people used to gather and meet and celebrate and have religious and all that other stuff. So we gathered there to have an acknowledgement, and it was the Blacksburg community, it was the Virginia Tech community, it was the students, it was the descendants of the enslaved, my family and others, it was descendants of the enslaver. Every weather that could happen. And I quite mean literally every weather. It went from summer to snowfall winter, to a windy fall, to a bright spring. And it was absolutely insane. And we were joking around like, oh, okay, so somebody's ancestors are upset. Turns out it was MaryLyle's, because she couldn't get here this morning. She's sick as a dog when she was completely fine leading up to this event. And so the joke we're joking right now is somebody's ancestors upset, and I don't think it's mine. So. Next slide. So one of the things that we had to deal with early on in this work was emotional regulation. Oftentimes we had to make sure that the Prestons focused on themselves. So it's two different conversations. The families have not come in a room together yet to have a conversation. We're 3.5 years in now. We're still not ready to come in the room yet. And it goes back, if you was here during the 1030, we realized there were some psychological considerations. We're bringing the two families in a room together. We have not been able to successfully find someone in the field that can specifically deal with this. We have some psychologists that we work with, and they've said, well, the field of psychology isn't really ready for it. And we found that in our research also. When you look at psychology, when it comes to cross-generational trauma or trauma, the focus is on the Holocaust and South African apartheid. We have successfully avoided our own apartheid and trauma here in the United States. So while we may be able to use the Holocaust or apartheid as a model, it's not a one-to-one translation to chattel slavery and all of the events that happened after emancipation in the United States. So one of the things that we had to deal with within that process is now we need to find some support in dealing with the psychology of dealing with the unfinished business of slavery before we bring the two families in a room together is what we're looking at. So in that perspective, we often in the work we're doing now is making sure that when we have conversations that we keep the Prestons focused on themselves. A lot of times in the conversation, it'll be about what they can do for us, what they can say for us, what we need from them. And when we kind of focus like, nope, work on you, we'll work on us, we'll work on you. That's something, a warm perspective. And then they realized there was some emotional regulation that they have to deal with. And so I'll pass that on to MaryLyle so she can give you some viewpoints of what that looked like within her family.
Yeah, and one of the things that people want so badly, I find within my family, is they want to know what action to take. How do I go out and fix this right now? Because it's wrong and I don't know how to fix it, and I want to know how to fix it. So tell me the answer, or someone figure it out. They want to make a change, and that's a good thing. But one of the things that we came to realize was that the change really has to come from within. If you have a cultural history with cultural debts and cultural regrets, Those things exist within you as a member of that culture. And the only place that you can deal with them to begin with is within yourself. And if you consider the fact that in order to engage in chattel slavery as an enslaver, you have to change the way you look at human beings. You have to change the way you look at yourself, and you have to stop regulating your emotions. You do whatever you want to do, and then you justify it later. And that happens within your own family dynamics. That's how you teach it. That's how you pass it on to the next generation. You either beat it into them or you shame it into them. And there becomes this dynamic of, I have an emotion. I don't know what to do with it. No one above me knows how to teach me how to regulate it. They just get mad at me for having it. So I feel ashamed for having that emotion. So I learn to hide it, but it's still in there and I can't control it. So it's going to come out later, and I'm going to be my parents when I have my own kids, and I'm going to be my parents when I'm out in public and something goes wrong. And I'm not going to know what I'm doing, but I'm going to know it's wrong, and I'm not going to know what the tools are. And so that became the thing. It's like, okay, how do you look at yourself and see where you're missing your own ability to regulate? And then from there, you can start making changes. But if you're just acting and doing what you think is best, you're imposing your viewpoint on other people. You're imposing your will, which is the same thing that happened before. It's the whole, white lady walks into the room and decides she knows how to fix everything, and it's not even her problem to discuss, even though it's her problem to fix. Like, it becomes that trope, and then people get stuck in it and they get offended by it, and then they forget to self-interrogate. So and then what happens is, the people that have to regulate are the people that were enslaved, are the descendants of the enslaved, or anyone that looks like they could be. So the white person is allowed to go off because it's socially acceptable, and the Black person has to regulate it to make sure nothing bad happens because it's a survival thing. And so you have this complete lack of emotional regulation on one end, and you have this excessive emotional regulation for the other person on the other end. And how do you come into a room and have a conversation as two families if that's at play? So that really has to be one of the integral and first places that we work on my side of things, is we deal with our own emotional regulation or lack thereof.
And then I'll wrap up. And then we have to work on our side, letting go of our social training of handling the emotional regulation for both parts. You see that within the Black community often. We make sure that, or we're taught to make sure white people are comfortable in the room. And it was how we made sure that we were safe. So that gives up on our 15 minutes, MaryLyle. So hopefully you can pick some more up during questions.
Yep.
All right, thanks.
That was awesome. Thank you.
I gotta stop sharing, y'all. There we go.
So next we have Professor Irvin Jordan Jr. Professor, are you able to share your screen?
Yes, I can hear you. What do you need me to do to get started?
Go ahead and start now. The floor is yours.
How do how do I advance my slides?
He has to share his screen.
Oh.
He has to share his.
Share your screen.
Would you repeat that?
Share your screen.
Oh, okay, just a moment.
Okay.
I'm not seeing my slides.
I think he sent his slides.
Yeah, but he's.
Yeah, I sent them in to you,
So you
and
want us to operate it for you? You would like us to operate your slides?
yeah, I can't see the slides at all.
Okay.
What do you need? What do you want me to do? Share screen again?
No. You were supposed to access your slides from your computer. But we do have your slides here, so I can barely one.
Okay, well, you want me to access from my computer? I can do that. I can do that. I didn't know I was going to be doing that, but that's okay. I'm gonna bring it up. Okay,
You're having some issues.
yeah, I think I got it now. I just need to. Okay, I brought up my slides and I do share screen.
I don't see you.
Okay, let me try that now. Yeah, there it is.
Okay, here we go.
Can everybody see the slides now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I got 15 minutes. So I want to make sure I don't go over my time. So that would be 2:28. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this session. And I'm just going to go right into it. First, I wanted to say that I want to define family as people who are related to each other in some way or fashion, who are sharing living in one household. This could be husbands, wives, spouses and their children, single adults with children, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to make that clear. So moving on to the next slide. Table 1. The ones I have highlighted were ones that I had planned to talk about during the course of my presentation. I wanted to emphasize number 6 about forced family separations, which really impacted families negatively, not just at the University of Virginia during the age of slavery. The idea of academic mobility, for example, that's when faculty members got other jobs, and so that would split up families. They would be separate family because the faculty member would move, and the family members belonging to professors on the other part of the university would be left behind. The other thing about debt collateral, there are cases here, at least at UVA, in which students use slaves as human collateral to pay for their student debts, whatever the debts were at the university. Before the university even was the university, it was splitting up families, actually, or proposed to split up family. The university was a big deal when it was in the process of being planted. Most schools, most cities and towns wanted to have the university there. Lexington in Rockbridge County, one of the owners there offered the university 4,000 acres and 57 slaves if the town of Lexington were selected as the permanent home of the University of Virginia. Of those 57 slaves, that consisted of about 9 families altogether. And this table shows the identity of the family and how many persons were in the family. So even before the university was the university, it was in the process of threatening the stability of Black families. And this is a schematic showing what the university looked like around the time, their very early years, around 1827, 1828. And the slaves were basically housed in what we call hotels and pavilions. You can see the pavilions towards the center of the illustration, and the slaves were usually housed in facilities in the back of the pavilion. I have slides of those coming up. And the hotels were basically classroom space and dining halls for the students. And many of these slave workers, particularly cooks and people like that, were housed there. So you can see this is a fairly compact, spatially speaking, university. Charlottesville would have been to the east of the university at this particular point in time. This is a recent interpretation of what a family quarter, one of the Hotel F, which is a cook's kitchen and family quarters. Now, these buildings look nice and new in these images, but I can assure you these buildings were not maintained after they were completed. Very few of them could survive even into the 20th century. So on the left is the outside view, exterior view, and the right is the second floor and interior view. Notice there seem to be very spacious, but actually these were very, very tight quarters. But the slaves who were working in the kitchen did their best to have their families with them, if that was allowed, because as I indicated earlier, sometimes families own members of slaves families that are on the other side of the university. I have to be careful not to say campus because officially the University of Virginia does not have a campus. The University of Virginia has a grounds, and if you say campus while you're at UVA, it marks you as an outsider. So you have to be very careful that you say grounds instead of campus. And this is a slave workyard, what we think a slave workyard might have looked like. And again, families lived in these if their owners did not object. Most of the time, it seemed that they did not object. But on the other hand, even though these families had these quarters, which looked comfortable and things of that nature, they didn't have a lot of domestic privacy because they were within earshot or eyesight range of the white families. I need to go back up one. This is just a side case about a slave who was assaulted because he claimed that a student didn't know the difference between water and butter. What is the relevance of this particular slide is that many slaves in the university's records are not identified by name. And this is an example of that. Even though this slave was badly beaten by this student, when the university faculty launched an investigation, and all the records that I looked at on this slave, his name was never mentioned whatsoever. So now these are what I have identified so far as the slave family names. And when I was trying to identify these, my focus was people who were married couples or parents with children, things of that nature. And so I come up with 27 names so far. They're obviously probably more than this, but that's what I've come up with so far. And some of these names have become since famous in university history, as I will illustrate in the next slide. Let me make sure you folks, because I'm juggling two screens here. Okay, so those are the names of the slave families that I have uncovered so far. And these are two former Thomas Jefferson slaves, and these are unusual because these are one of the few slaves that we have photographs of who were actually Jefferson slaves who worked at the university. On the left is Sally Coulter Cole. On the right is Henry Martin. Sally Coulter Cole's claim to fame was that she was eventually freed, but she married a free black man. And so, long story short, she and her husband, at least she had to pretend to still be a slave in order to convince whites to allow her husband to remain in the state instead of having to leave the state as required by state law. Henry Martin on the right, the university's janitor and bell ringer, 60 years of service at UVA. He's also one of the first blacks at UVA to receive a pension from the university for his years of service, not as a slave, but for his post-Civil War service. He's the very first one that we know of, at least that I know of, who actually received a pension for his work. He tried to convince the university to allow his pension to be paid to his wife after his death, but the university turned him down. Continuing on the theme of Jefferson slaves, this is a case where owners understood that sometimes they had to negotiate with their slaves. These four men were hired out to the university from Monticello, but they made it clear that they weren't going to cooperate unless they were allowed to visit their wives. And finally, Jefferson's Monticello overseer finally agreed to allow that to happen. But it is interesting because it shows that slaves did have an amount of power and some autonomy over their lives, and that these men were able to make this deal that they would be allowed to visit their wives. Otherwise, they would not have been very productive workers or slaves that could be trusted while working at the university. Another case of possible family separations caused by the course of slavery. This young woman was sold for what would be $29 in today's money. It was $1 back then. And her husband also was hired out to UVA. So there are some cases, not many, but there's some cases of slave husbands and wives working at the university. But in nearly every case that I have seen so far, they never worked in the same household. They were not hired and working with the same faculty member or UVA staff member. And here's a case where a law professor was contemplating selling a slave because he'd been pretty much a troublemaker. The university faculty member indicates that this whole matter would be painful to the slaves, not only to his mother, but also to his late grandmother if she was still alive. They did wind up eventually selling this slave, but I have not been able to find out any further information about what happened to this slave, whose name was, in some records, he's James, in other records, he's called as Jim. But you notice that you see that the faculty members recorded in the letter that his mother loves him and is loved by him, and if his grandmother were alive, it would be painful to her. In this case, a woman named Betsy Homer, her husband was in Richmond. They were separated. Her husband was in Richmond and she kept at the university. Apparently, she was able to negotiate some kind of deal with the professor who owned her, because he said he allows her to go to Richmond to see her husband. I've never been able to find out exactly how regular that was, but it was something that was allowed for her to do. And these are this is her dictative narrative that we have in one of our collections here, when she talks about her relationship with her owners and her being able to visit her husband on occasion. Isabella and William Gibbons are right now probably the most famous slave couple at UVA, because they're the first slave couple to have a building named after them at the university, a student dormitory. It's a beautiful building. Unfortunately, the public cannot have access to this building because in these times, the universities have the infamous security measures. So you can't get in that building unless you are a student who has a room in that building, and your student ID will be needed to get into the building. So we don't get to see the inside of this magnificent building. But her claim to fame was that she was Charlottesville's first Black public school teacher, and he was a minister in Washington, D.C. Now, here's the thing about their family situation. I was on the university's Memorial to Enslaved Monuments Committee, and when we designed this, I and others had some serious issues with some parts of the memorial. In this case, Isabella Gibbons and her husband, these families, slave families on the memorial, are not indicated on the memorial together. They are separated. In fact, Isabella is her name is about 3 panels away from her husband's William. So you wouldn't really know that they were actually a slave, that they were a married couple. So the university has done good work as far as trying to reconcile or publicize or bring to the historical memory its slave past. One of these is the Jefferson University, the early life. It's known by its nickname of Jewel, Juel, and that's the link there for the website. It's a very good and user-friendly website. This particular part of the website focuses on slaves at UVA, and the beauty of it is it also includes slaves who had last names, which is fairly unusual in similar products at other schools across the country. The university had the president of the University of Virginia had a commission on slavery at the university, and these publications are now available online as a PDF or as a link. And it provides very detailed information about the university's background and research into its use of slave labor. And this slide, I think, is self-explanatory. 3 major books that concern African-American slavery at the university. I particularly recommend the one in the middle, Educated in Tyranny, and the one, The Founding of Thomas Jefferson's University. This is my next to my last slide. This is from a lecture I gave at Harvard. Harvard had a very large conference on universities and slavery. Scholars came from around the world to attend this, and this is my 10 considerations of how to memorialize African-American slavery at American universities. I call your attention to number 2. some in the last few years, it seemed that the pushbacks have really started to increase again. At one point, they were sort of declining, I felt, nationally, but now they seem to be on the rebound again. You got places like Florida where diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are being attacked, or in Alabama where they've actually been abolished, just recently abolished last week by Alabama law in schools, public schools, colleges, and state agencies. So this is just a roadmap that I came up with on how to do this at American University, how we can commemorate slavery, memorialize the American slaves. And finally, I want to conclude by mentioning Ms. Lorraine Payne Williams, whose funeral was today, actually. And this presentation is dedicated to her. She was a wonderful, wonderful lady, highly respected. It was standing room only at her funeral earlier today here in Charlottesville. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jordan. And due to the time, we are going to close out this session with Shelley Viola Murphy.
I thought you were going to tell me.
Shelley, you can share.
So if you got questions, y'all better ask them now. Okay, don't go nowhere. Wait a minute.
I'm not that person, but
Wait.
oh, he has to stop.
Oh, you gotta do, stop sharing, Irvin.
Okay.
I know him.
Is that you, Shelley?
Yes, it is.
I thought I recognized that commanding voice. Okay, Shelley. I'm going to exit out now.
I'm the elder in the house right now.
Okay.
Which some of what he said, I will not repeat. So which is good on time. So that was, here we go. So while he's pulling that up, I'm Shelley Murphy, and I'm with the University of Virginia, and have worked with him on several things. We serve on Historical Society, Albemarle Sharpsville Historical Society. So the name of my talk is Beyond the Records, Conversations with Descendants of Slave Owners and Genealogy. So it's obvious I'm the genealogist, okay? So quick overview on the project, which I'll try not to repeat anything he said, the importance, the objectives, the challenges, and then making the connection. So I also want to say that I had to make a decision on who was going to turn up today. Shelley at the university or Shelley as a descendant of enslaved folks and the genealogist. So you're going to get a little bit of both, okay? So I'll do the right thing and then I'll say the right thing. How's that? So a glimpse at the project that Irvin talked about. It started back around 2007 when there was an apology for slavery by the Board of Visitors. And to make it short, student-led, just love that, the fact that that wasn't enough. An apology wasn't enough. So basically, he was on the president, talking about Irvin, was on the President's Commission on Slavery and University. And at that time, Dr. Teresa Sullivan was the president of the university. So long story short, first thing they did as far as the commission, they went to the community, number one. And I have to give them kudos for that because that's how I got aware of the project, was because I was a member of the community. So they went to the community, talked about all things about the history, but also what do you want to see in a memorial? And so again, the memorial, which was that first slide, you can see it there, it's in ring, it can hold up to 4,000 names. So that's the estimate of the names. And just looking on the right side, that is a description in the day book of folks being hired, what their names were, the enslaved, and how much money the slaveholder was doing. So to make it clear, the university was basically built by enslaved labor that was rented, not owned. University only had 3 or 4 slaves that they owned. Henry Martin was one of them. But the rest of them were rented. So as a genealogist, and those of you that do this type of research, you know what I had to do is go get a map and find out where's Thomas Jefferson, who's the people around him, where's his family, where's the money flowing from, right? So you just saw, you saw a UVA person, then you saw Shelley, because I had to follow that money wherever it was going, because the renting of labor was money. All the way back to the roots of slavery, economics. It's about money. So anyway, my time frame as a researcher is about 1817 to 1870. And my job that they hired me for is to find descendants of those enslaved laborers. Okay? What you see, this little piece down here is the original list that I received, that I started from with over 2,000 entries. What's not on there is location, age. 90% of the enslaved individuals don't have last names. But I did get the slave owner or whoever had permission to rent the person to the university for the labor. So my talk is going to come around about me engaging with descendants of the slaveholders. So I'm going to do the university side, the scholar side right now. So the importance of humanizing the past, filling those gaps, connecting or correcting historical narratives. So as we know, we're not educated in slavery. We have to learn about that history of slavery. And you hear from all of us that are doing presentations, those of you in the audience, doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, learning that history of what happened within your family or in your community. Also, it's about reconnecting and reclaiming that identity. I, as a descendant of free and slave holders as well, I want to know who came before me, what they were doing, what were the experiences of their life. And then who do I tell about that for the next generation to know? There's also the emotional and the healing side. People got to understand, I don't know where we're getting the word heal from. I'm not there yet. I've been doing this research well over 30 some years. I haven't seen the word heal yet. I hear what you're saying, but that just like the description of reconciliation, first we got to understand it, and we're not there yet, in my opinion. And the thing of it is, because the families have the stories and the history, and they're not always going to be the same as the slaveholding family. They might not have it as one of you commented earlier. They're going to have something different. So how do you bring all that together? And yes, it's emotional and it's healing. And I have a roller coaster ride from Monday through Sunday when I'm doing research. You can see the cussing that's coming. You can see the tea. You see the glass of wine, and you just constantly see the popcorn because it's nerves or it's something. I'm trying to find something. And then again, as a genealogist, we have these things we call like a happy dance when we find something. Well, I'm going to go tell it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go tell it. So there's education, which everybody gets enriched by us sharing this information. And it helps to promote empathy. I'm a little hesitant on that one too. But if people learn and hear from the past, doesn't mean it's going to be healed, but it will offer some understanding. And maybe some reasons why other things happen or things that haven't happened yet. So the objectives about this, for me, when I get ready to contact descendants of the slaveholder, number one, I want to be able to tell these stories. I want to uncover the hidden stories and the connection. And again, people love UVA. but UVA has a deep, dark history, and you saw some of that with Urban Jordan's presentation, as well as Texas Christian and so forth. So we want, again, I'm gonna stop using that word healing, but foster some understanding and have a safe space that both sides, descendants of both sides, it's open, it's legit, and it's open for conversation. And possibly whoever's going to define, which they might, both sides, reconciliation. The other objective is to enrich the genealogical research by hearing and learning and understanding of the stories that we're going to bring to the table. And by the way, on that slide on that day book, talking about how a lot of us talk about the ancestors talking to us, that was my ancestor on the 3 people he had rented to UVA, which I didn't find out till about 1.5 years ago. And again, bringing it right to the face. And now I'm trying to say, well, who are these people? Who are these people on both sides, not just one side? So again, being able to humanize some of the names that we're seeing is really important for me, even if I only have Bob, Sam, Suki, that's somebody, you know, that is definitely somebody. So there's challenges. And for those of you in Virginia will know about this book. And if you don't know about that book, when we hear that term, the happy slave and this, that, and other, this was the book that was taught in the public schools. This is the book that was used. And that's where that remark of the happy slave, don't believe that stuff. Come on. Anyway, the challenges. A lot of people, both sides, I don't want to just say descendants of the slave owner. I want you to understand there's challenges on both sides. It's not that easy for me to go to a slaveholder that was holding my family just as much as me being on the other side. So I want to deal on both sides. It's a painful past. The whole country isn't dealing with this stuff. There's not enough of us here that is going to say, wait a minute, we got to confront this. We got to deal with this. This is going on a long time. It's coming out more and more, which I'm happy about. Both sides have the emotional part they go through. They also go through the guilt. There's grief, there's anger. And again, that could cause a barrier to communication. Plus, we've been taught history that might not even happen. Or they're skirting around the whole topic, the happy slave, as an example. Or this didn't happen or that didn't happen. And again, I'm not talking about always having a record, but we have things that were handed down for white and black families, stories, historical things, involvement in historical events and things that aren't in a textbook. And you're only going to learn if you're sitting at the table and people are sharing that or somebody's documenting it. So again, that discrepancy in historical perception is just rampant. You know, that's a challenge that we all as researchers were being able to conduct studies and bring this to light for clarification. Also, another thing that's a challenge for the two parties that come together is the differing in the expectation or the goal of what we're trying to achieve. And I'm speaking as a descendant now. What I might want might be different than who I'm sitting across the table from. Somebody might want an apology or forgiveness, and someone else might just want the acknowledgement of the truth. This is what happened. Your people enslaved my people, or vice versa. So again, make the connection, right? The initial outreach, one thing I want to say is just be patient. And I'm speaking now to descendants of enslaved people. You want to make sure you got your research. You want to prepare for this meeting because you want the meeting to happen, right? But you don't know what's going to come out of it. You know, and I'm going to commend you guys because the dialogue is working for you two right now. That's not always the case. I almost want to say that's rare, okay? That's almost kind of rare, but it's good and more people are starting to work together. So again, you want to set your goals before you go talk and either try to attempt to have a legitimate conversation. Just be patient and plan it out. You might want to talk with someone else. Be clear on your intentions. You want to make sure that you're getting consent, especially if, and I'm talking about if you're recording it. I'm not saying asking permission, because that's the other Shelley that's coming out. I'm not asking permission, but I want you to obtain consent because you're going to either record them or you know you're going to document it or you're going to write that story about it or you're going to share it. So you make sure, because you don't want to get so far in and then you're going to be confronted with someone that says the exact opposite. And now you got the two families pitting against each other and stuff. And again, I'm saying family, because if the blood is running, that's family. And blood's not the only thing that makes family, but in this instance on this research and stuff, and you come in DNA, all kind of things, some people are going to totally ignore that. So again, you want to make sure you're clear on your intentions and you want to be at the same table. You guys are not ready in person yet. It will come when it's time, when you're both ready for it. So what you're doing is correct. You're working your way through that because you know what? You're also gaining trust. And that's another factor. Okay. And so the other thing that I want to comment on is when you sit down, you're basically interviewing. And now I'll put the scholarly hat on. I need information. This is what I'm looking for. I got a goal, and this is what I want to talk to you about. So respectfully, I'm watching my tone because either side can be aggravated. And I'm a sister to 4 brothers. I always talk loud. And if you go loud, I'm going louder. And I have to be careful when I'm dialoguing with anybody because that will come out. And so you want to just ask, and I do this right up front. What's the best way for us to talk, to communicate? How do you want to do this? You want to get on the phone? You want to get on Zoom? That's my baby is Zoom. Get on there. How is it best for us to communicate? Or do you just want to be on the phone? You're not ready to see me, right? I'm greedy. I want to see them, but I want them to make the choice because if I can take it in steps, my outcome is going to be a little bit better. Okay, so again, use open-ended questions, allow for responses, try not to judge. I'm saying non-judgmental. Here comes the UVA person now. Non-judgmental attitude needs to be from both sides because we are talking about something that passed, but we're still dealing with those issues in the present. Okay. And also, anytime after we meet, and I'm saying this from who I'm dealing with, different families now, I always summarize. So I'm closing out one session and also tipping out what's going to be the next talk or whatever we're after. And I always thank people, and I suggest there's follow-up, and you're going to do this, you're going to do that. You want to make sure you set, almost like setting an agenda. And you're going to a meeting. And I just want to acknowledge coming to the table, folks are not familiar with them. That is an organization that has chapters throughout the country. Richmond, I believe, has the largest chapter. And the coming to the table is descendants of the slaveholders and descendants of enslaved. And they're all at the same table. They're sharing information. There's dialogue. There's training, there's educational opportunities and things. So look for a chapter near you or find out about setting one up, especially if you're in an area like Charlottesville, because there is a chapter there as well. And here in that middle picture there, you're also seeing that those are people that are looking at the memorial because there is a timeline also included. And there's a water segment. If you heard Queen Quet today about libation, there's a water feature that is around that memorial. And you saw on Irvin's slide, the memory marks and the people's names, and there's also occupations on there. Because we also got to remember that people were humans before they were property. Those folks are or were mamas, daddies, aunties, uncles, cousins, and so forth. So again, being able to, you got to think about calling out names. Because some people's names on the research that I'm doing, those names have not been mentioned since they were enslaved or since they died. And so anyway, that's my presentation. My timer went off for my 15 minutes. So if we have a couple minutes for questions, or if anybody has any, and I thank you. Here we go.
And we thank you. So there's another panel starting at 3 o'clock, and technically we're on break right now.
Yeah.
But I think we're safe to take until about 2:55, which isn't, there's never enough time, right? But we can go up to 2:55 if anyone has questions. I'm here and then I'll come to you.
I don't know.
It's not on.
Oh. So you gotta speak up.
Yeah,
And project your voice.
Just mentioning coming to the table, the historic triangle, Williamsburg, Yorktown, Jamestown has a chapter of coming to the table
Great.
here.
Thank you. Ma'am.
My question, my name's Nikki. My question was, how is today's political climate actually affecting the work that the three of you are doing? With the rollback of DEI, and the continued,
Challenge.
yes.
Well, for me, I'm actually housed under ODEI, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so far, it's not affected anything that I'm doing, but I'm also not, I know what just happened in Florida, and that's where I had moved from, you know, up in all the firing and all of that with the DEI folks and things. But so far, that for me, I'm known enough locally. I'm coming. I'm coming to get questions. I'm asking for meetings. And it's gotten to the point now, as far as descendants of slave owners, their contact. And so this is a good thing. So what's happening politically, I try to keep out of my research and not bring it in there. We can have another conversation on that, but right now my focus is making connections. And for my own personal self is when I'm talking to someone that was a slaveholder, they need to understand I'm looking for my people, my family. And whatever you have, I welcome that you're willing to share with me, be it photographs, letters, notes, you know, and again, it could be no record, you know, but what do you know? Or if you know of any stories and things like that, that you can share, because now we're trying to bring the experience and the life of our ancestors so we can pass that down. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
So because you was a private, a lot has not changed. So the conversations are still being had. DEI is still a common language at the university, and the stories are still being told.
We put all of our work under a nonprofit organization established by our family, so we can keep ourselves out of any corporate influential requirements, any academic institution requirements, any political requirements. We give ourselves wiggle room to find the loopholes in any legal requirement by doing it all that way. So that's how we decided to handle it, because I have a background in government, federal government, and I know administrations roller coaster up and down, in and out. So I was trying to keep ourselves away from being heavily influenced by that type of environment.
And we'll take our final question here. That's you.
Okay, I was also wondering if the people on Zoom could hear.
The microphone is good. That's beyond my control. Was that your question?
I just want to say that, when this was mentioned on the table, the local affiliate, and I'm with the Richmond group, and, I'm also involved in the national level. And, unfortunately, the Charlottesville group disbanded. Yeah, but our group in Richmond is going really well, and really excited to check into us and all of us. And then the local one here is very active, so that's a good thing. And there's a linked descendants working group, so in coming to the table, we call those relationships linked descendants. And so there's a working group at the national level. And as you said, that's where you can get the training. If you look on comingtotable.org website, and then find linked descendants working group, then we can get a lot of information.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. And we have 1 minute remaining before the next group will start setting up. And I think it would be time if each of you can just share a final statement. Okay, sorry, I want to go and share a final statement. Let's give them a final round of applause.